All right. In case you guys haven't met me before, I'm Meggan Holzer. I'm the Rural Towns Liaison for Commissioner Jones and Brown. I'm the only liaison that works for two commissioners. Makes me kind of the oddball. With everything that people have said today, my presentation should be like 4 hours long, but it won't be. So before as a liaison, I was a planner in the planning department. I was planner for 5 years. Some of you have been around for a while, remember me from when I was a planner and I'd come to your meetings. I used to run planning commission meetings, and I could talk about planning all day. My degree's in planning. I find it very interesting, but I promise I will not bore you with all of that. I'm gonna go through just the rudimentary, what is planning, and a lot of it you guys are gonna know already, but hopefully you'll pick up some things that maybe you didn't know. So I don't mind questions if you have questions, but let me try to get through it. I don't want to keep anybody here longer than we need to. So we'll wait till the end for questions, because I may cover something that you asked the question for in the process. So here it is, planning everything you need to know and then some. Planning goes way back to Socrates' time. And he's found that it was an important part of society. What is planning? Why does it matter? Here's part of the reason why it matters. We want to plan things next to each other that make sense. So sometimes things don't even make sense. A nuclear power plant and a spider farm, where else are you going to put them? I guess together makes sense. And here's an example of poor planning. And I think everybody has seen things like this in places. Sidewalks that go nowhere, roads that go nowhere, driveways. I just saw one yesterday where it's a driveway, but it runs into a wall. So this is why we plan, hopefully to avoid things like this. So I'm going to start big picture. Big picture, land use plan. Land use plan is the overall vision for the development of a community. So these here are land use plans. These are old ones. Don't freak out. These are old ones that I borrowed. It determines the potential future use of property. So what you see on a land use plan isn't necessarily what is there today. A great example of that is like along Eastern or Jones, where there are houses today. Tomorrow, next month, they may be converted into offices because that makes more sense on a major road like that. So today's use isn't necessarily the potential of what those could be. The land use plan includes the map, which we spend a lot of time on the map, but there's also text that goes along with that, because sometimes there's policies for different areas that you want to include in the future of your area. So these are updated every 5 years, and some of the policies are specific to an area, like Laughlin, where you have development along a river. Nobody else has a river there. Well, I guess up in Wappa Valley you do too. Sunrise Manor, development near an Air Force base, and Mount Charleston, development with a national forest. So that's why the land use plans are specific to a specific area, because not all of our areas are exactly the same and need to be treated differently. So I brought these instead. This is the Spring Valley land use plan from 2014, just as an example. And then this is just a zoom in on it. So you can see, can I take this off of here? So in case you haven't gone through the land use process or this is new to you, you can see on the map, it's kind of general, it's big picture. It's where do we want to have casinos? Well, in the middle of a subdivision probably isn't the best place for a casino. Along Las Vegas Boulevard is where casinos should be. So this purple, it allows for resort hotels. When we go along a highway, like the 215, or along, here's a good example, along a railroad, that's probably where industrial should be, along a railroad, so they can get supplies delivered to them. So all this light blue and dark blue is industrial zoning. And along major roads, you have more commercial potential. So this is big picture. How do we want our future to look as far as development goes? Oh my goodness, okay. So if that's a land use plan, what is zoning? Zoning, by a textbook, is dividing an area into zones or sections reserved for different purposes. Or, what I always used to say when I was a planner, making sure that a fireworks factory isn't built next to your home. So zoning consists of the maps, which look kind of like this, but slightly more colorful, and the development code. And if you've been around for a while, Title 30 used to be about this thick. And it was like our Bible in planning, and everything is in there. That code, the development code, has everything in it. And you can get that, it's available online now, which I don't even have the book anymore. Now I look everything up online. So here's why zoning is important. This person bought a house, not realizing they're right next to a driving range. And this happens a lot. Someone just told me, actually our new guy Brandon just told me he bought a house and it's next to a quarry, which when you go look at a house, it's only on the weekends. And the quarry isn't working on the weekends. So this is why zoning is important. So zoning categories, there's a bunch of them. But basically they break down to residential, going from the lowest density, which is RU, all the way up to R5, which is high-rise, intense multifamily. Commercial, there's office commercial, all the way up to super Walmart centers. We've got manufacturing, industrial. All of these go from less intense to more intense. Resort hotels and H1. And then there's a few other categories too, such as public facility. Those are government buildings, maybe a post office, urban village, open space, and RV parks. And those are just specialty units that, specialty zoning. So how do these two things work together? We have a land use plan, we have zoning. How do they go together? So the land use plan says what you can do, zoning says what you might, land use plan says what you might be able to do, zoning says actually what you can do. So here's a chart, and I know it's small, I'm sorry, but as you can see, this lists the land use categories. It lists the categories that, are shown on these maps here. So our purple, for example, is, oh, I had to cut it off, sorry. I'll pick a different one. We'll say the red. Red is commercial general. So commercial general is an understanding along this road in this area we want commercial. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the highest commercial at every spot along that area. There's a variety of uses. So CRT is like those houses we talked about that can get converted into offices. That's low intensity. CP, all of these, so commercial general allows CRT, CP, C1, and C2. So there's a wide variety, and that's where you guys come in and say, hey, this is on a corner surrounded by houses. Maybe C2 is too much. We don't want a Walmart there, but an office might be good. So you can massage it within the land use categories. Okay, so here's an example. This is Durango in the 215, and this is the current zoning. So you can see there's a bunch of red, that's C2, that's already been zoned commercial. There's a little light blue that's MD in there. Someone probably had a project, an idea for a project, and didn't come to fruition because that is vacant, at least in this photo. And then those green parcels. The green parcels are RE. RE doesn't always mean that it's meant for houses. RE is kind of a holding pattern. Everything at one point was RE. And so those mean no zoning's been done on them yet. So yeah, currently there's a variety here. So on those RE, what would be the potential? Homes, probably not. But, so in the land use plan, you can see it's all red. It's determined that at Durango in the 215, probably the best use for that section right there is commercial. So on our zoning, the first one, someone could come in on that MD and do a project that's MD, office manufacturing warehouse. But if they wanted to change it, they have the potential to do commercial. So that's how the land use plan and zoning work together. It's now and in the future. So Title 30, Development Code, it's regulations for how to use and develop a property. It tells you what's appropriate, what it should look like, how it should be separated from other uses. It's the design of structures, it's landscaping, parking. Everything that goes into developing a project is in Title 30. The limitation is, and I think this gets confusing sometimes, Title 30 is conceptual. When you guys look at plans for a building, it's a concept. Does this building fit on this site? Does it look right? Is it set back enough? Does it have enough parking? The nitty-gritty, what kind of bolts they're going to use, what kind of 2x4s they're going to use, all of that is when they get to the building department. So sometimes plans will show a lot of details, but at this point, keep in mind, it's very conceptual. We want them to have some detail, but as far as how it's going to be built physically, that's done as part of their building plans. So here's an example from Title 30. This is the use table in Title 30, and I always pick theater as an example because it checks every box. So on the development code, on the line of theater, you can see there's some gray boxes and little white boxes. Those all correspond to the zoning categories at the top, and I should have brought a pointer. So across the top, it has every zoning category, starting with RU, going all the way to H1. If there's nothing in the box under that zoning category, it's not allowed at all. You can't even ask for it. Then there's different initials in the box. So under C1, for a theater, it's a special use permit. So if we owned a C1 property, we want to build a theater, we'd have to come in and have a special use permit so the applicant can prove to you that it's appropriate at that location. C1 is supposed to be less intense commercial, so maybe it's not appropriate, but it's up to the developer to plead their case. C2, which is our more intense commercial, it's a permitted use. So as long as they meet all the code requirements, that's something they can do there. They don't have to ask permission to build it there. They still have to get a design review and stuff, but it's a permitted use. MD and M1, again, special use. In UV, which are big, like mud mixed-use developments, it's a conditional use. So when there's a conditional use, a C, you go down a little bit in the chart below there, and it says conditional use in UV must be part of a mixed-use development. So years ago, we would give UV zoning as a hard zone, and maybe they didn't build the mixed use. So someone might think, oh, I got UV zoning, I can come in and do a theater. No, the theater was only allowed in that zone by being part of a mixed-use development. So when there's a C there, it's a conditional use. It means you got to meet those requirements to be able to do that use. And then in H1, which are our resort hotels, it's a special use or an accessory use. If you just own H1 and you don't build a hotel and you want to have a theater, it's a special use permit. You have to ask for that permission. If you have a hotel and want to add a theater, it's an accessory use, which means it goes along with the bigger use. So that's how to use the use table in Title 30. Every use you can imagine is in here. There are some really funny different uses. I think taxidermy's in here. There's very interesting things. But you're not going to find Bath and Body Works. You're going to look under retail. There wouldn't be specific things like that. It's under retail. So sometimes it takes a little back and forth to find what you're talking about or what you're looking for. Okay, also in the code is a section called community districts. And in town, you probably don't deal with those very often. But in the rural areas, those are a big part of what we do. There's 6 different community districts. In CD5, which most of our rural communities are CD5, there are some alternative standards because it's understood the development in rural areas is a little different. So in town, if you built a garage in your backyard, it needs to look like your house. It needs to be the same colors, have the same textures. In rural areas, it's understood that big properties like that, you may be having different kinds of structures. They don't have to match like that. That's just one of the slightly relaxed standards in CD5. And there's certain things that you can only do in CD5, like a bed and breakfast and a dairy farm. So this lists the different districts, and you can see CD5 as a long list because all of our rural areas fall within CD5. And here's the map. So you can see the green right in the center is 1, it's the most intense, and then as you go out, it is less intense. 6 is area that's not seen as developable at this time. And the orangey yellow, that's CD5, so you can see our rural communities are in the yellow. Okay, there's lots of different types of land use applications, and some of you may have seen all of them, some of you may have only seen a few, but I've listed them all. We're not going to go through each one because I know I don't have time, but zone change, basically, I have a property, I want to change the zoning so I can do something else, and if it's conforming to the code, if I have CG and I want to do C2 for the zoning, then that's conforming. I can go through the regular process. If I have a CG commercial planned parcel and I want to do houses, that's non-conforming. It does not conform to what the land use plan says. So then you would go through the non-conforming zone change process, which is lengthy and is expensive. And that's by design. We want people to, we spend lots of times, I know you guys, especially enterprise, you guys spend a lot of time on these land use plans. We don't want people coming in to go against the land use plan, so we make sure they really want it. So the non-conforming zone change process is just about 6 months to get through. There's special use permits, which is uses that would be different or that you want to have on a property, waivers, design reviews. I guess you guys have probably seen most of these. Vacation and abandonment is probably the most confusing one you deal with, and it's the most confusing to the public because it's hard to explain, and especially, like Mike said, government patent easements. So most of you in town will have planners at your meeting. Don't be afraid to ask them to explain what a vacation and abandonment is, because chances are the people who are there aren't going to quite understand it. And they get those cards, and they used to be, I don't know if they still are, they used to be that you had to sign for them. So then it seems very important that, you know, if you have to sign for some mail, if it's registered mail, it seems extra important. So you'll get a lot of people showing up that, I thought this was super important, and sometimes it's not. And sometimes they are. So that's just kind of a strange one. A newer one that we didn't used to have is an application review. It used to be that our only way to review an application was to make them do an extension of time, and that isn't always appropriate. If I have a use and it's going along, it's not also an extension. I want to come in and show you what I'm doing. So that's a pretty recent one. The AR is an application review. Waiver of conditions, that's a bit of a tricky one too. If somebody has something approved, a lot of times we see this with businesses, if they have limited hours, they may come back a year from now and say, hey, you know what, I find my clients come in an hour later than my limited hours. Can we change that? Can we either eliminate the hours or change those hours? So that's a waiver of conditions. There's other things that go into zoning besides the zone and the community district. There's overlays, and there's multiple different ones. So if you're in one of those areas, you have to look those up. Sometimes they have to do with design, like in Red Rock. In the Red Rock area, we have specific design criteria so that it stays consistent with the desert environment and the national recreation area. And then some, like the Asian design, are to be culturally in sync with the area. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through an example. We're going to go start to finish through a land use application. I handed you out a little flow chart right there. That is start to finish how an application goes through the process. I chose one in Sandy Valley because that's where I live. But this is a good application because it's pretty concise and straightforward, so we can walk it through the process. So this is our main road in Sandy Valley, Quartz Avenue, and this was an application for a Family Dollar store. So they bought the property that has the star on it. You can see there. It's planned for commercial general. So a Family Dollar goes along with commercial general. They already had C2 zoning, so they didn't have to change the zoning. But if they didn't, it would have been conforming. So you can see I have an arrow pointing to that parcel next door. That one, half of it is planned for commercial general. So they could come in and ask for commercial. But as it stands right now, they are residential. So that property, right now, someone could buy a home, put it on that land. But if they wanted to have a store, they could come in and apply for that change. So that's how we work with the land use plan and zoning. So we're going to focus on our star parcel. They wanted to do a Family Dollar store. So it's a permitted use in C2. There's no specific conditions. They just need to come in and meet all the other code conditions like height, setback, parking, all those things, site design. So I handed this to all of you. You can take it home with you, and it might be helpful, especially if applicants have questions. This might be helpful, but we're going to walk through it right now. So the first thing, the developer, they have the parcel, they have the right zoning, it's permitted use, what they want to do, so they're going to come in and submit an application. They fill out an application form. This has so much information on it. It tells you who the property owner is, and sometimes it could be a different applicant. In this case, they hadn't bought the property yet. So the applicant was different, and they hired a consultant. So the correspondent is someone else altogether. That's not unusual. If it's mom and pop, those could all be the same. They're representing themselves, and they are also the property owner. On the left-hand side, it'll tell you what they're asking for, what the different uses are. And at the bottom, they have to sign, the property owner must sign, and it must be notarized. And when it's submitted, the planner checks to make sure that person is authorized to sign for that property, which sounds a little crazy, but we've had people come in try to get things approved on property they don't own. So, which wouldn't that be quite a wake-up call, find something was approved on your property. So on the back of the application form is a list of every kind of application and what you need to go along with that application. So they were asking for a waiver of development standards and a design review. So they had to provide everything that goes along that line, which you'll see here. So here's the application form. The 2 pages that are on top of each other they're called the ownership disclosure form. And that is the applicant's way to communicate to the county and to the commissioners who's involved with that application. So if Commissioner Jones's mother came in to ask for a waiver, he'd probably know. But if not, this form would tell him, oh, Mrs. Jones is applying for something, he'll have to abstain from it or follow those procedures. It's a way to communicate. A lot of times that happens, like Commissioner Brown. You'll see him abstain from things that have to do with the baseball stadium because he works with not the 51s, the Aviators, sorry. So this is a way of communicating, oh, hey, this is an Aviators property. Oops. They also fill out a fire permit survey form. This is another way of the applicant's way for them to communicate with the county. And this is so that the fire department can be on alert. If they have high-piled storage, if they have hazardous materials, if they have property that's only served by a well, all of those things are alerts to the fire department, so they'll follow this application through the process so that they can make sure they get proper things approved on the application. And then there's assessor's parcel map, which shows where the property is. Oops, I'm touching the screen. I need to touch the thing, sorry. They have to provide the deed to show that they own the property or that they have permission, that the right person has signed for the application. This is very important, and this isn't something that's provided to you all. Oh, no, I can't remember. Yes, you do get these. I forget who gets what. This is a justification letter, and to me, this is one of the most important pieces of the whole file, is this justification letter. This is the applicant's way to communicate to you. I used to tell applicants, tell what you want and why. You can give a description of your project, what you want to do, and why you think it should be approved. It's them pleading their case. Hey, I'm building in this case. We want to build a Family Dollar. It's going to be this big. We have the right zoning. We think it would be an asset to the community. Please approve our project. So these contain a wealth of information, and it's a good way to really just get an overall view of the project. And the second most important thing, I think, are the plans. I'm a very visual person, and I'm a plan reading kind of person. So I read plans. I look at plans. Plans tell you so much. It tells you where the building is on the site, how much parking they have. And plans aren't just the drawing there. See all those little notes around the edge? There's a wealth of information there. So this is going to tell you so much about the project. Here's a blow-up of a part of that. It tells you this information is requested on most plans. It shows you the size of the building, the parking space requirements, what they're providing. When a mom and pop comes in, their plans aren't going to be this detailed. They're no less important, but they aren't going to have this kind of detail on their plans. And then they are also required to submit a landscape plan and a floor plan of the building. And sometimes that floor plan is more important than others. If they're building a shell building, nothing inside, I mean, floor plan's not so important. If it's a use permit for a specific kind of use, you might want to see how it's arranged, how do customers get into the building, things like that. Then they also submit elevations, photos or drawings of what the outside's going to look like, because we all want to know. What this particular one in Sandy Valley got approved, but they were conditioned to make the front look a little more Western, to go with the feeling of our community, so that they submitted plans later that had like a front porch on it. So how it looks is very important. Oh yeah, here's the later plan. You can see the front porch on there. Okay, Blanca showed you where you can find the stuff online, all the documents. So the planner, the developer has come in, sat down with the planner. They've submitted all that paperwork I just showed you. Sometimes it takes a couple visits because they may want changes to plans. They may not have had some information. Once they submit, once everything's good, planner takes all that in. And the applicant is going to walk away with this form right here. It tells them their application number, the town board that they're going to go to, the date and time of that town board, and whether they're going to the Planning Commission or Board of County Commissioners and the date and time of those. It also has notes saying, be prepared to make a presentation, you should bring your plans. It's a question I get a lot. Well, were they told to bring plans? They are. But I have to tell you, if it's someone new to this process, this is overwhelming. I used to see that with people come in and their eyes would just be like, oh my God, this is so much. A developer, they should remember their plans. A mom and pop, if they don't remember it, it's your call. They probably can describe the project well enough for you. So that's your discretion there. But they are told to bring their plans. But some of them also have a misperception that you all are provided with plans. So I think sometimes they think, well, they've already seen them. I don't need to bring them. We know that's not the case. Those plans, once planning accepts them, they get sent out all over the place, because we aren't just approving something for Clark County planning, we're approving something for the entire community. So all of these entities receive copies of plans. Some get them more than others. Like the post office doesn't necessarily need a use permit for a nail salon. But these go out, but the post office definitely needs a tentative map to know where new lots are going to go and what their addresses are going to be. So these are all the different people that get copies of plans. And they also have, they come along with a sheet that they can put comments on that comes back to the planner. So sometimes you'll see at the BCC, there'll be notes from, the airport gave some input, Public Works gave some input, and those come from these plans that were sent to them. So this is the staff report that was prepared for the Family Dollar. So the planner accepted all those plans. They read the justification letter. They look at the plans, and they write a report. It details a lot. It's like capturing the whole thing in one report. It talks about what's going on in the neighboring properties, what the zoning is, what things were done on this property in the past. And all of that basically comes down to what staff is recommending. And that recommendation goes out to you guys, so when you get something, you know what staff has recommended. And they'll give reasons for their recommendations, and it also includes conditions. So on this particular one, current planning had some conditions, Public Works had some conditions that they needed to comply with, building and fire, and water rec. So to explain what this is at the top of the staff report, this is the owner of the property. In this case, by the time it got to Board of County Commissioners, that ownership had changed. They had bought the property, but we always stick with what was submitted in the first place. That was a record when they came in. Next, it tells you what they're requesting, which parts of land use they are requesting. In this case, it was a waiver of development standards, and there's multiples of those, and a design review. And then these are the mystery initials. The first two initials are your commissioner, the commissioner of the area for this project. The next two are the planner that's working on it. This one was Dionisio. Many of you knew Dionisio. Then the final two these are who's reviewing it in Public Works. This one was Jason Alswang, which many of you might also know and remember. So this is the breakdown of it. At the top, we keep it general. Waivers, these are the waivers they're asking for. Further down on the staff report, it breaks those waivers down even further. So in this case, they were asking for an alternative design for the trash enclosure. So this specifies they're asking to have a wood trash enclosure where concrete block or masonry is required. So this is getting down to the nitty-gritty specifics of what they're asking for. If it's a reduction of setback or parking, they'll include a percentage of what that reduction they're requesting is. If the application that's coming in is a result of code enforcement, or if there's code enforcement action on the property, that will be listed in the staff report as well. So you can see in this little section, and this is not from the Family Dollar one, in this little section you can see the case number is an active case filed in June 2019 in regard to building without a permit. And a lot of applications come to us because of this. People just didn't know they needed a permit, so they built something and it doesn't meet setbacks, things like that. When someone comes in for an application as a result of code enforcement, the fees are doubled. So that can get pretty hefty when you need a bunch of waivers and use permits. So the application has come in. Planner has accepted it. Plans have gone out to all different departments, entities to give information. Then planning prepares the notification, and these are those tan postcards that people walk in with, that you get at your home. And how far out we have to notify varies by the type of application. A simple use permit or waiver is 500 feet, but they have to make sure it gets to at least 100 separate owners of parcels. So here in town, in a very dense residential area, you can get to 100 people real quick, 100 separate properties. Out in Sandy Valley, where we have 2.5 acre properties, it will grow until it gets to 100. So that radius has to grow until you can get to 100 separate ones. So sometimes the radius is a lot more than 500 feet for a simple waiver. And why the notice is in different areas, it'll tell you. So a project of regional significance or a high impact project goes out 1,500 feet. It's believed that project is going to affect more than just the 500 feet around them. So it goes out to a larger audience. So that's how the radius is determined by the impact of that project. So this is in every file. And so our little red spot there is our Family Dollar. That's how far the radius went out on this one to get 100 separate owners. And this comes up a lot, and people come to the meetings all the time and say, well, I was not notified. I did not get a notification. So if they call our office, we're able to pull this up and say, oh, well, because you're outside the radius. And that's why we also don't just rely on postcards. It's posted on the agenda. It's posted on our website, multiple different places. So here's the card. When you get them, they're tan, but this is what the card looks like. A lot of people talk about that it's very confusing. The card is very confusing. I love to make things usable, and I don't know how to make this more usable because if you simplify it, you lose out on important information. So I think we're kind of stuck with this, but when people complain, I can say, listen, we're not hiding anything. You got everything right there on that card. So I do know some people come in to the meetings because they didn't understand the card. They don't really care, but they thought it was important because of the card. But I think we're kind of stuck with what we got here. Okay, paperwork's come in. It's gone out to everybody. Planners have created their staff report and made a recommendation, including recommendations from other entities. Now, the next step is your applicant, our Family Dollar, is going to go to the town board or CAC. So if it's a developer, I know we've talked about this before, if it's a developer or an attorney, they're pretty smooth. They know, they've done this a lot. They're going to know how things work. If it's a mom and pop, they may not know. And the town board, even though you all are real people and we know each other and we're friendly, you guys are scary to them. They are coming in and they have to prove something to you. They have to ask for you to approve something they're asking for. And, you know, it may be a big casino and nobody's emotionally involved. It could be someone asking to have a reduced setback so they can build a mother-in-law quarters for their mom to come live with them. So it runs the gamut, and so those mom and pops, give them a little bit of leeway. They need a little bit of help with that because it is scary if you haven't done it before. So you guys hear it. You hear your presentations like we talked about earlier. They go through the protocol. You make your recommendation. So at the end of the night, how does that recommendation go back to the county? How does planning know, or our office know, what happened? And that's this recommendation sheet here. So on the rec sheet, there's one for each item. It tells what kind of item it is. It tells who made the motion, what the vote was, how many neighbors were present, if we do a count, for and against, and then it gives a brief synopsis. So this is the secretary's way to communicate back to the county. Here's what happened at this meeting tonight, since the whole county wasn't there to see it. So they've gone to town board, they've gotten a recommendation. Their next step is planning commission or board of county commissioners. And I think I did this slide a little out of order. But this is an agenda for planning commission. Come on. So some of the things we talk about, people don't get it because we're talking, our county talk. One of the things is it on consent? Is it a consent item? And you get blank stares. Consent, you guys don't have consent at your meetings, but at Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioners, there's a section at the beginning of the meeting. In this case, it was items 4 through 15. Generally, those are items that are non-controversial, lots of vacation and abandonments. Non-controversial, they've been recommended approval by staff and by town board, so we don't really need a separate presentation because they're probably just going to go through without any problem. So those are called routine action items. We call them on consent. And those items, 4 through 15 in this particular meeting, unless one gets pulled off, they all get voted and approved all at once. And you'll see at the meetings, everybody gets up and leaves. Everybody that was approved on consent, they're like, we're out of here. We don't have to sit through the rest of this. If there's an item on there, and sometimes there are, if there's an item that is controversial, or someone wants to hear separately, or wants to add a condition, they can ask at the beginning of the meeting and say, Madam Chair, I would like to hear item number 11 separately. So consent will be approved without item 11, and then 11 will be heard along with the rest of the meeting. On this particular meeting, items 16 through 25 are non-routine. So that means every item on that list is going to get a hearing. It's going to get a public hearing and the whole shebang, the presentations, the public comments, everything, and a vote. One thing that, and I think I put little things here, and we call those off consent. They're non-routine public hearing. So if we say, oh, that's off consent, you got to stick around because it's going to be heard. Finally, at the bottom, this is for Planning Commission. And they go through this real quick at the beginning of the meeting. People that run meetings, I used to run Planning Commission meetings, we get used to talking real fast. And we breeze over some of this stuff. But to someone who's new to the process, this stuff is really important. So items 4 through 25 on this particular agenda are final action unless appealed. So a lot of people will go to the Planning Commission and think, oh, I'm done. But there's a 5-day appeal period. So if someone is unhappy on either side of an item, they have 5 days to file an appeal. This right here already tells you where that will go. If something is appealed on this particular one, it's going to go to 3/4/2020 Board of County Commissioners meeting. So that gets glossed over at the beginning of meetings, but it's always here on the agenda. Okay, how do you know where an item goes? Does it go to the Planning Commission or Board of County Commissioners? That is a good question. And it's super confusing, and we'll just let the planners handle that. So, for example, this is the use permit. So, goes to the commission, which is the Planning Commission. When it says commission, it means Planning Commission, except for all these 17 different reasons. All those 17 different reasons, it goes to the Board of County Commissioners. So, I couldn't tell you a rule of thumb on those because it's all determined by the code. And whatever it says on your little sheet, that's where it's going. So all of this process, everything we've done so far, all the hearings we've had come down to one piece of paper, basically. And it's called a NOFA, Notice of Final Action. So at the end of that process, this says you were approved, and this is what you have to do to build that thing or do that thing you asked to do. At the top, it says this particular item, this is our Family Dollar, was approved on January 3rd of 2018. And the bolded stuff at the bottom are all the conditions they had to meet. Sometimes there's no conditions. There's just the boilerplate. There's just the regular stuff. You need to build it. If you can't build it in 2 years, come back and tell us. Sometimes they are super conditions that could keep it from happening. So on this particular one, and in rural areas, you'll see this a lot. Public Works, they asked to waive the offsites because we have no sidewalks in Sandy Valley. So the developer said, well, we're not going to build sidewalks just for our one project. Public Works said, we're cool with that, but you need to come back in 10 years. Because maybe in 10 years it's developed, like Ann Road, if anybody remembers, Ann Road used to have nothing, and now it's highway. In 10 years, maybe it'll be time for you to do sidewalks. And so that was the condition on that project, to come back in 10 years. Mike talked about it a little bit. When we put conditions on, we like them to be as specific as possible. If that condition just said, return for review of offsites, how do we impose that? Who determines how long that is? 10 years, it's very specific. Some of the conditions that come up, one that drives me particularly crazy, and did it when I was a planner, work with neighbors, work with county staff. And you know what, I'll bet you guys as town board members have a different idea of what working with a developer is than the developer thinks. So just a little food for thought. Make your conditions specific. Maybe it would be come to an agreement. Have a signed agreement for blah, blah, blah. But that one always makes me crazy, work with. Any of you that have kids, you know working with your kid on something may not be the same idea on both sides. So all of that comes down to planning. I thought this was pretty cute. I'm telling you, this town ain't big enough. So there we go. That was planning in a nutshell. And we have a few minutes, so questions. Yes, sir.
When you put the list up there of other agencies
Yes.
that are copied, I counted 29 of them.
Mm-hmm.
How long does each agency have? And is it done simultaneously or consecutively?
They are done simultaneously. All the stuff goes out at the same time. And they have, it's changed over the years. They usually have like a week or 10 days because 8 weeks is how long a land use application takes. 8 weeks, beginning to end. And if we gave them too long, then their stuff might not get in. So, and 8 weeks seems like a long time. It's like, wow, it takes them that long to write a staff report? No, it doesn't, but we have rolling cycles. We have planners writing up staff reports. Then we also have to make sure that notices get mailed out in time. And that's something I didn't talk about there. Notices, by state law, have to arrive before the Planning Commission or Board of County Commissioners date. And there's always people that say, well, I just got my postcard today, when they come to your town board meetings. And that is unfortunate, but if we sent them out any sooner, we wouldn't make that 8 weeks. You know, so we got to get it in there plenty of time. So that is a frustration. One thing you can tell them if that comes up, that this is not your last opportunity to talk about this item. you absolutely have the right to go to the Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioners and have your voice heard. So does that answer your question? Okay. Yes, Ray.
I had a question about the code enforcement when you talked about double fees.
Mhm.
How would that apply in the rural, you see this a lot in the rural areas where your person will buy and that stuff was there. And so if they try to come into compliance, are they looking at double fees?
That is a good question. If there were a code enforcement case on it, I don't know the answer to that. Do you guys know? If it wasn't them that caused the code enforcement violation, that's a really good question. I would hope we would work with them on that. But I will tell you, we've had people say, oh, that was there for 20 years. That was there before I bought it. Well, we can look back, and I think you can too, on open web and see aerial photos going back. And that thing was built 2 years ago after they bought it. So I think we would probably do some investigation on that, but that's a really good question. I'll find out the answer to that. Because it's not just in the rural areas. Here in town, people build stuff all the time. You buy a house and, something's been done. Yeah. And double fees go to building department too. So we want people to follow the rules. Yes?
On the code enforcement,
Mm-hmm.
so we put a condition on, like we did something recently, for them to come back in 6 months,
Mhm.
for like a check-in, so to speak. Who tracks that 6 months? Does the county send out, or is there a person there who has seen that? Or is it just up to that property owner whether or not they're gonna come back?
It's up to the property owner. Planning used to send out reminder cards on all those extension dates and everything. Believe it or not, it's really expensive to send out all those cards and everything, and especially during the downturn when we were all trying to save money, it was determined that applicants need to take that responsibility themselves and follow that. So if they don't come back in the 6 months, technically, it would void their application, but I don't think most of us would think that was necessarily fair. We would get them, hey, you need to come back and tell us what's going on.
But who's monitoring that to make sure they come back?
The applicant has to take that responsibility for themselves. So, like if it was 2 years to commence, and they've gone 2 years and haven't done anything, their application expires. So it's part of the responsibility of being an applicant. You need to follow it yourself.
But some of them, like, going to your point, you have coming back
Mhm.
after 6 months because of something different, and we're not sure how it's gonna impact that neighborhood. So we're wanting to get some feedback from neighborhoods during that time, and then we wanna know, in a year, how that worked out.
Mhm.
Are you saying that no one follows up with them to make sure that they did what they were supposed to do, or that there's no complaint? So they don't come back automatically to us in a year?
No, it's up to them, because they have to come back and resubmit either an extension of time or an application review. So I hear what you're saying 100%. We don't have not the capability, but manpower to track all those applications. It has to, at some point, that developer, or that applicant, if they feel that strongly that they wanted to have that thing approved, they need to keep an eye on it.
So it's possible that business could be in non-compliance after a year,
Mhm.
we not know it, and they're not alerted in any way, and then this could be, 5 years before we find out that they're.
If that were the case, someone might notice it. You can always call planning, call the planner, talk to your liaison, say, hey, this was supposed to come back to us and we haven't seen it, and we'll look it up.
That's very scary for
Yeah,
us
I hear you.
as community representatives, that that's the case, that there's no oversight and no accountability to these people. Because some of these businesses are kind of new, and we're not sure how disruptive they
Mhm.
are. And so it's kind of leaving it on us as volunteers to somehow come up with some system to track all of those that we've done.
I hear ya.
Over the course of a year. That's kind of scary.
Right. Well, I would suggest that if it's egregious, if they really are having a detrimental effect, someone's going to tell you, someone's going to notice, that they're going to call code enforcement. If they're just doing well, chances are nobody's going to, if they're following the rules, chances are they're not going to cause any problems. So it is a bit of a shortcoming. I absolutely get what you're saying, but that's how the process works.
And unfortunately for the community members, they don't know.
I know.
They don't know that they've got 6 months or a year to monitor them.
I know.
It's something I'm gonna have to live with, when in fact, it's coming back up in a year, but no one knows that.
Right. And I understand that, and I think that's part of the reason town boards and CACs are so important, because you are community members, and you live right there in the community. That's why you have to live in the community that you are on the board for, so that you can share that information, because the general public doesn't understand this stuff. They don't know. They may even come to the meetings and still not completely understand it. So hopefully, we can all share that information when we go out in the public. And I know that doesn't completely answer your question, but that's it. Yeah, yeah. I know. Yeah. Well, I'm doing my job right then. Somebody's unhappy. Yes, Bob?
Perhaps I'm doing this wrong, but what you mentioned, Dionisio, on the header
Uh-huh.
there. I use a dial 455 431.
Mhm.
Sometimes I'm on there, on hold for a while, 20 minutes, whatever, and then I gotta say, oh, it's TD or DG,
Mhm.
or whatever, and they need the right direction. Is there, and perhaps this is somewhere on the website, is there a way of getting everybody a list of the
Yes.
planners so we can go directly with them? Because I mean, I've read somewhere, I want to say congratulations, it's made full sense to me. You know, and there's some things that I go, I don't understand this, can you please explain it?
Right. We have that list. Maybe we can add that to the resource manual, but I will tell you, it's changing all the time. And Tiffany and I just had one the other day, and we looked at it and we're like, who's BB? We had no idea. So they have been gearing up more staff lately. So it's probably constantly going to be out of date, but we can do that.
I just, because of that comment, before I got the book, I wasn't that there were several planners when I was asking them for suggestions or comments, and one of the things that a couple of them, I don't want to speak for all of them, but several of them said, please let them know. We want board members. If you have a question and you know, and my suggestion is building relationships. Different ones come to different meetings, say hello, get their cards, know who they are, but they, at least several planners said, tell them to call me. If they're not sure about something I've worked on, they would appreciate the call, and then you get those answers before the meeting, and you're able to flow much better.
Cool.
So my question is this then, so if we as a board decide we're gonna implement something where we keep track of those like that we wanna come back in a year, say, to make sure there's no noise issue or whatever. If we did that as a group on our own, then is that something that we can then ask to be added to the agenda for them to come back before us? I mean, what's the process for us to have that applicant then come back before us and do what we asked them to do?
You gotta remember, it's what they asked.
Yeah, I agree. So as long as the
as
board
long
has.
as that came from the commissioners,
Yeah.
as far as their recommendation, then there'd be an obligation. But remember, is that as tough as it is, you guys are advisory, and that unless those conditions are put on by the board of county commissioners as the final condition.
Yeah, I got that.
Right.
So that-
We're
yeah.
assuming that they have.
Yeah, okay.
So let's assume that they have. Since there's no process in place, if the town board, each of us took that upon ourselves to do that, what would be the process then to
It
have
would
that?
still require an application, Yvette, because the way they get on your agenda is the onus is on the applicant. So when they get that NOFA at the end, the notice of final action, it includes all the conditions, including you are required to come back in 1 year for a review. So if they're not in compliance, the accountability factor is their use permit, potentially their zone change, whatever they have done, they're no longer in compliance. So that could be a code enforcement, or if it's people you know, it could be a phone call, hey, don't forget, you have that condition. But yeah,
So basically, we really don't have a process we can put in place then.
it would do no good for you to try to put an agenda item on there if the applicant wasn't even aware of it or participated, right? If there is a public review requirement, then they have to file that application and do everything that Meggan said, the whole 8-week process to do that review. So sometimes there's administrative reviews on things, which means they have to
telling you to kind of give the benefit of the doubt then, if that's the case, because now you gotta consider they may not ever come back before you.
We see people come back for reviews frequently when that's the requirement, because folks get the notice, they get their NOFA, and they want to be compliant.
Oh, I thought-
Bad actors might not, so they get the NOFA initially, when it goes to the Board of County Commissioners and their final action. They don't get a reminder.
Okay.
That's what
Right,
they don't
right.
get. They absolutely get notified that that's a condition.
Okay.
They don't get it a year later or 6 months
Okay,
later.
all right, thank you.
Okay, anything else? And let me give a little disclaimer here. I'm no longer in the planning department, so everything, if you have detailed questions, I'm always happy to help, but really, the planning department is who you should ask questions to. They keep up to date on the code and any changes. I just love planning, so I volunteered to do this. But yeah, this is a disclaimer that what I shared with you is a really high-level overview of the whole process. Specific questions should go to planning.